Hello and welcome to the first episode of my indie game devlog. Making games is something I have been interested in since I was a fairly young child. I think the first time I ever tried to make a game was on my Amiga 600 when I was probably around 10 years old. I did not get very far. It's always something that has seemed a little bit more complicated to me than other types of software development. I've been an avid gamer for most of my life, and in the last decade or so, I've also found a lot of interest in watching people develop games and learning how that whole process works. It kind of began either with backing Double Fine for their work on Broken Age and Kickstarter, or when I bought Indie Game the Movie back in 2012. I think that was in the Humble Bundle. More recently, I have been closely following the development of Aquilinox by Carl, or Thin Matrix, here on YouTube, and that is the series that has inspired me to try and document my own progress here on this channel and on my own game. Since I started this process, I've probably spent an equal amount of time writing code and watching other people's devlogs for inspiration. There's so many out there, and I'm constantly impressed by what these people are creating and how quickly they're doing it. There is no way I am going to be able to produce the kind of things that I'm seeing people do on YouTube right now. I don't have the skills to make it in the first place, and if I did, I still wouldn't have the time to do it right now. I am in my mid-30s. I have a full-time job, I have a wife, and we have a 2-year-old son together. And those are my top priorities, and if I get to work on games, it's going to be in the evenings or on the weekend, if I'm lucky. The game I'm working on right now is essentially just a remake, like-for-like remake of a game I was obsessed with in the early 2000s. It was a little flash game called SnowCraft. I didn't actually know what it was called until relatively recently. I just referred to it as the snowball throwing game. My friends and I wasted many hours at college playing this game. If you're not familiar, you essentially just control these 3 little characters that throw snowballs at some opposing characters. You couldn't aim, you just threw it in a straight line, and you had to move the character to the right place and then throw the snowball. You could control the power, and the aim is to knock over all of the opponents. It's very light on mechanics, and so I thought that would be a good first project. I have been a software developer for more than a decade now, working in various different languages, both on the back end and the front end, and specifically recently Android development. And so I'm fairly familiar with Java, and just recently I switched to Kotlin for my Android development. And so I wanted to use Kotlin to write a game. Looking around, that didn't leave me with too many options for the software I could use to write this. Unity wants me to write JavaScript or C#, and Unreal wants me to use Blueprints or C++, neither of which I wanted to do. So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that LibGDX is a very helpful platform that will enable me to write the game once, run it on many different platforms, and use a language I'm familiar with. And that is really the name of the game here for me. I don't want to be starting from scratch on a new engine, in a new language, with a whole bunch of new concepts that are specific to game development. I wanted to keep as many things as familiar as possible, so I get to carry on using my current IDE, which is IntelliJ. I get to use a language I'm familiar with, and I just have to learn some game development specifics. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the videos I recorded during my development process in the first month. So I had a very basic title screen, a black background, some circles with boxes around them. These boxes are the bounds of the object, so anything that hits those boxes should hit the characters. But as you can see, the snowballs currently did not, because the snowballs didn't have bounds. So now you see the green squares around the snowballs and the collision detection. That was a lot of work. I just didn't record many videos of it because it was tedious. I switched the background to be white because it's supposed to be a snowy field. It's a little bright. But you can see I started to add some state to the opponents here. You can hit them the first time to daze them, and the second time to knock them over. But when they're knocked over, the snowballs fly over them. And the third hit, after they get back up again, knocks them unconscious, and you can't hit them anymore. I tried to implement movement, which I guess technically worked, since they all moved. But then it crashes when you hit them. So I fixed that crash, which was index out of bounds error, and improved the movement code. So they now move around a little more randomly and independently, but as you can see, they can disappear off the edge of the screen, which makes them impossible to hit. Running the project from IntelliJ causes some memory issues. The game kind of hangs a little bit. But in the state it was in, I decided to give it to some friends and ask for some feedback, and they said, I can't even move these characters on my screen because they're so small. So I increased the size, and I also added some indicators of the state. So the exclamation mark there just is supposed to indicate that the player is dazed, which is supposed to only last for a second or so, which you can see there on the opponent is working, but was not working correctly on the player. The second state there with the kind of sad face shows that they were knocked out, but not unconscious, or knocked over, not unconscious, and the cross eyes indicates they're unconscious. Obviously, these need to be replaced with real assets. And I changed the movement code, and you can see how well that went. These guys are just zooming around the screen at full speed, going wherever they like, tending to stick to the corners, which is not great. In the original SnowCraft game, you're not supposed to be able to cross the central line, the diagonal line. So I did some research and made some more modifications, and I got it so that the players cannot cross that line. But unfortunately, it also resulted in the state where the players could no longer be moved, which is quite a problem in this game. And as you saw there, the opponents could still cross the line if they wanted to, which was a little bit pointless because you can only shoot in one direction. So I had quite a bit of trouble getting these the diagonal line limitations working. Here I hit a infinite loop and crashed the game. And there I warped the player into the other half, and I could only move him in the opponent's half. So I modified that, and the guy disappears. I tested it with the others, and sure enough, they disappear too. I went into my code and figured out that I had one character incorrect here. There you go. Now, if you take the player up to the line, when you release, they get moved back into their own half. Ideally, you wouldn't be able to move them into the other half or across the line at all. So I still need to rework that, but for now, it puts the player back in a position where you can continue. You see this guy's moving fast. The opponent, he's still allowed in my half of the game, and he can move off the screen, which is bad. Moving a player to the bottom left of the screen here causes the game to crash for reasons I cannot explain. Top right is fine, bottom left, instant crash. I believe it was the position reset logic that caused the crash there. So I handled that issue, and unfortunately, as is often the case, I immediately found the next issue, which is if you're carrying the character around when they get hit for the third time, when you release them, they go back to the idle state, which is bad, because they're unconscious. We don't kill people here. So I decided I needed a break. So I went outside and set up my telescope, pointed it at the moon, and got my phone aligned-ish to share some pictures of the craters on the moon, and interesting to look at. The next day I fixed the bug where the person moves back to an idle state, but again, fixing one bug and testing it out led to me finding another one, which shouldn't be surprising, but in such a small game I was surprised by the number of little bugs and edge cases that were in the code. So this third character here, you'll see in a second as I drag him down, he immediately gets knocked unconscious, even though there are no snowballs there. And that's because the snowballs were not despawning properly. They would reach the edge of the screen and disappear. They were no longer rendered, but they were still there and could be collided with. So I fixed that. Then I thought, I need some music. There was a post in the game dev subreddit by James Hammond saying, check out my music, and so I did. And I thought, it sounds pretty nice. Maybe I'll buy this track. And then I thought, well, I'll just buy the whole album. It's pay what you want for the album, so I did. I bought it. I didn't just take it for free. And then I went through and picked out a couple of songs that I wanted to use in the game. So here they are in the game. I settled on this track called Nook after getting some feedback saying that the Snowflakes track was too soft for a fight. And I added a nice new UI. I didn't know what I was doing with this. Thankfully I found freezing UI. You can find information for that in the description. And since I'd added music, I wanted to make sure you could turn that off if you didn't want to hear it. So I added a little toggle and a preference, and you can turn the music on and off while you play. And that has been my first month of game development. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I will read every single one of them and do my best to answer whatever I can. Until next time, goodbye.